Welcome, everyone, to Coffee with a Codex. My name is Dot Porter, and I am a curator in the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies and the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts at the University of Pennsylvania. I am here today with Nick Herman, who is the Lawrence J. Schoenberg Curator of Manuscripts, art historian extraordinaire, and a delightful person. And he is going to show us MS Codex 2030, which is an unfinished book of hours. And it's just so cool. And I'm excited to be here with him. So without any further ado, you should unmute so they can hear you, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dot, and thank you everyone for being here. Hope you can see the book. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, as you can see by the slight tech difficulties. This is MS Codex 2030. This is quite a new acquisition, a relatively new acquisition for the library. It was purchased at auction in 2019, and so we presented it in our new acquisition showcase back in the fall of, 2021. It's a lovely book of hours, probably late 15th century and French, but the binding is considerably later, as is often the case with books from this period. And it's what's called Morocco leather, red leather. This looks to me like continental European binding, like maybe from the late 18th century or early 19th century. And in fact, it's got on the spine, if you can see, writing that's actually in Dutch, which is really interesting because it gives us another piece of a pretty interesting provenance trail for this manuscript. Latins geschreven Getijnboek, so a prayer book written in Latin. So this is kind of typical of a sort of pretty fancy 18th century kind of aristocratic or collector's binding. I'm sure there are binding specialists who could date it more specifically, but it's interesting that it has Dutch on it. Nice marbled end leaves, and this is the ex libris of one of the later owners, 20th century owners, Otto Oren Fischer, which he was actually an interesting collector. We know quite a bit about him. He was a physician. He worked for the Hudson Motor Company in Detroit. He was affiliated with Miami University in Ohio and left some rare books there, including some Shakespeare, a first folio, and other stuff. And here upside down, there's a stamp, J. Kendall, and we'll see that stamp again later. That's another owner of this book, which we have a pretty good and interesting chain of provenance history. And I know I'll get to the main part of the book very shortly, but I do want to show you some traces here of a auction catalog clipping that was glued down at some point. That's pretty normal to find that in books that have been in the book trade in the 19th and 20th centuries. A dealer price code here that shows us again that this book was in the trade probably in the early 20th century, and some interesting, again, J. Kendall here, and this is interesting because this writing is it's a bit early 19th century writing, and it sort of jives with a little bit of what we know about the manuscript. This missal was purchased at the sale of the Duke of Marlborough, and someone has added an R in the spelling of Marlborough, which is pretty funny. This was a famous collection that was sold in 1819, and this manuscript, very interestingly, this described as a missal, which is incorrect. This is a book of hours, is in that sale, and that tells us a little bit about the book, which is interesting. And this Duke of Marlborough, George Spencer Churchill, lived from 1766 to 1840, the fifth Duke of Marlborough, and the library where it was sold was called the White Knights Library. It was a famous library, lots of manuscripts in other collections in North America and in Europe come from that sale. And George Spencer Churchill was the grandfather of Sir Winston Churchill, so very illustrious kind of ownership history. Um, Here there's some writing, maybe by the same person, maybe not. In this MS, some of the designs are not colored, but are intended as specimens of the careful outlining of the artist. And we'll see that a little bit later. Um, Here we have some of these sale clippings that are still in here. And this one conveniently tells us that the date of the sale in 1983 and price it fetched. And so these are from different sale catalogs. This was done quite a lot in the period to sort of keep track of sales. This is one from 1943. And then we've got some provenance here, which repeats some of what we already have seen. J. Kendall, 19th century stamp, Duke of Marlborough, note on flyleaf. A.M. Patrick sale. So this was a sale in 1943. Property of A.M. Patrick Esquire. So it's pretty interesting to have this kind of amount of documentation. And then this is an earlier, pretty faded list of contents that someone has drawn up again, probably in the 19th century. So that's the kind of front matter for this manuscript. And Telfus has been in some interesting places because the binding and the title on the spine is Dutch. Appears to have then previously been in a Dutch collection. Of course, the book itself is French, probably made in Paris. So the book has moved around a little bit. It's a book of ours from the late 15th century. In some ways, it's kind of prototypical. In other ways, it's a little bit different, and we'll look at that. So, like most books of ours, it starts with a calendar, and the calendar has half the days of each month on the recto and verso respectively. And this is a fairly basic calendar, but we have these letters going from A to G, so that's a 7-letter repeating cycle. Those are the Dominical letters that tell you what day of the week or when a Sunday occurs. So each year has one of these letters. And then on the left in red, this is the lunar cycle. It goes from 1 to 19 in Roman numerals. Some days don't have them. This because some days never have a new moon. This tells you each year would have a kind of number from 1 to 19 that would help you track the new moon. And all this is important for calculating movable feasts in the Christian year, and most particularly Easter. And of course, these calendars are interesting because the saints that are listed for each day of the year vary. Sometimes we have empty blank spaces where there's no important saint.
Claire would like to see a close-up of one of the capitals.
Oh, sure. I think we can do that. They're a little bit damaged, but I will. No, I think we can gently. I've handled a lot of books of ours in particular, so I'm confident to lift this up very gently. And that's a KL initial, right? For calends. That's the first day of the month in the Roman calendar system, which is what was used throughout the Middle Ages. And then that writing, those 2 lines in red, which are a bit smudged here, are in French. And they tell you that June has 30 days and 29 moons. So that's some calendrical information that's kind of basic. Some books of ours have calendars that are much more complete and complex. And interestingly, the Dominical letters, I've noticed a little detail. The A's are a little bit different in their style of script. And sometimes those A's are written in red, so rubricated, or in gold, just to kind of single them out. And so I think what happened is that that was just either a guide letter, so somebody was supposed to come in, one of the illuminators or decorators, and add a more fancier A over those, or they never did, and so somebody came in perhaps a little bit later. And it's a different scribe. It's not the same scribe as the person writing this A, for example. So there's that little bit of information about like the process of creating this book. And then the other thing is that we have some saints that are particular to Paris, including in October in red. So this is an important day, Saint Denis. So that tells us who was an early Christian martyr associated with Paris. So that tells us that this calendar was probably is associated with Paris, and that the book was made and meant to be used in Paris. Now, this is the end of December in the calendar, and then the book, you can see the J. Kendall stamp again here. The book moves right along to the core part of a book of hours, which is called the Hours of the Virgin, 8 sets of prayers to be said throughout the day, these prescribed times. And often in books of hours, you'll get sections in between the calendar and the Hours of the Virgin, but not in this one. And often, but not always in books of hours, you'll have a nice miniature, and almost always it shows the scene of the Annunciation by the Archangel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary, that she will bear Jesus, and there's a little depiction of God and these sort of rays of light coming through the window. And this is a miniature that we call these miniatures, these small images. It's a little bit damaged, but it's pretty nice. It's got nice gold highlights. I'm going to lift it up a little bit as well. And look at how the painter, who's a different artist than the scribe and the illuminators doing the borders, everything's very subdivided. But look at how fine those nets of gilding are. It's pretty nice. And if I gently rotate the book, hopefully you can see that shining a little bit. That's what's called shell gold, which is powdered gold that was mixed up into paint in a little shell. That's why it's called shell gold. And I hope you can see the contrast with the gold leaf that's applied to the letter D here, which again is a bit smudged, but I hope you can see it flicker a little bit. I think you can. So a different effect.
There's a question. Somebody sent me.
Okay.
Where the pages cut down as the illumination goes all the way to the edges.
Absolutely. So these manuscripts in general, and books of hours in particular, tend to get trimmed every time they're rebound. And sometimes they've been rebound multiple times. They would originally have much wider margins, but because they were books that were heavily used, and this book has a lot of traces of use, by devotees who were using them for prayer, the edges would get thumbed. That's a term used in the book trade, right? That they would get kind of a bit darkened through repetitive use with maybe fairly dirty hands. So they get trimmed up to be kind of tidier. And especially given that this has what's probably an 18th century binding, maybe sometimes the bindings are made to fit a particular shelf in like a grand country house. So the bindings, they would sort of trim things down to the size of the binding, regardless of what they lost. And so that's pretty typical that you've got that. As you can see, this border extended, and there would have been a margin of at least 1 or more inches around. Absolutely. And of course, when handling any manuscript with paint or ink all the way to the edges of the page, be very careful to not touch it excessively or at all, really. So this is the Hours of the Virgin, which is the core of most books of hours. It's a set of prayers that have different components. Many of them, much of it is drawn from the Psalms, from the Bible. It's in Latin. And as you can see, the hours is divided into 8: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nones, vespers, and complines. And this, as you can see, is what's called the rubric for prime, so for the third of the hours. And this is the beginning of it with this nice initial D, but there's no miniature. Some books of hours that are more elaborate have miniatures at each of the hours. This one doesn't. So that's I'm flipping through because I want to get to the next section, the Hours of the Virgin. And by looking at specific variants in this text, and it's a little bit, I'll spare you the details because we only have half an hour, but there are websites online that help you do this. There are variants in this text that change according to where it was written or where it was intended to be used more accurately. And this one has variants for Paris. So again, it jives with those saints we saw in the calendar, which are specific to Paris. I look at a lot of books of hours, so this is why I'm giving you all this specific information. And you're probably like, this is more specific than what I'm able to talk about, because books of hours follow this kind of, one of the things interesting about them is that they follow this general pattern, but then there are interesting variants which tell us more particularly about how that particular book was used. So the next major section, you see there's a blank verso. The next major section starts here, and this is the 7 penitential psalms. Again, in many, but not all books of hours, there is a section of the penitential psalms. And these are 7 psalms, specific psalms from out of the 150 psalms in the Bible. And the image here shows King David in prayer. He's repentant, he's before God, and he has his harp, which is his sort of trademark attribute. And of course, David is the traditional author of the psalm. So he's depicted here. Same painter as same illuminator as the image of the Annunciation. Same palette. It's kind of a ruddy palette, not the splashiest pigments, but a lot of this kind of carmine red, a blue, grays, and then this kind of interesting shell gold interlace up here that's kind of like a Gothic arch. And so we have the penitential psalms, kind of a nice silk bookmark here, which I am guessing would be probably contemporary with that 18th century binding. Hard to know, but it's certainly not a 15th century bookmark. Probably there would be someone who would be able to look at the material and inform us more specifically about that. Although I imagine it'd be hard. There's not a lot of clues in this little bookmark. But there you have it. And okay, so we're still in the penitential psalms, and the penitential psalms are followed by immediately in the same section by the litany. So the litany is like a list of prayers and saints, and the saints vary as well. And this litany is really identifiable because of these initials. They're mostly S's for saint, and they also vary a lot based on the location. So you got some saints like the apostles, etc., who are kind of standard. But then you have other saints that are not standard and that tell us a little bit about more about where the book was meant to be used. And this one has a couple of unusual saints, or saints that are associated with Paris: Saint Fiacre and Saint Clodoaldus, which is Saint Clude. And so that can help us again localize the book to Paris. And here we have, I'm sure if you're a regular on Coffee with the Codex, you've seen this many times before.
I love pointing those out.
A catchword. That's interpretationem, which is up here. So that's just for the binding purposes. The scribe would include this text at the beginning of the next page. This is at the end of a gathering, right? So not at every recto, but at the end of one of the gatherings or choirs. So interestingly here, we have at the end of the litany, we have some more prayers, and this one is in French. And this is quite frequent that you have in books of hours made in France, a switch from Latin into French towards the end with these sort of accessory prayers, these extra prayers. And it tells us a little bit about the literacy at the time. This is the 15 joys of Our Lady. So you'll see that there are 15 initials for the 15 different joys in this particular prayer. And And we have some very short excerpt from the gospel that's kind of here. It's interesting. It's usually towards the front of the book. We've got some blanks. And then we have another miniature here, and this is for the Hours of the Cross. And I believe it's in this section where we have one of the more interesting features of the manuscript. So the manuscript has 4 complete miniatures, all painted in the same style, probably in Paris towards the end of the 15th century. But what's quite fascinating is in this particular section, so this is the Hours of the Cross. So it's an additional set of prayers to be said throughout the day. There are spaces for additional miniatures. I think there are 5 more, 5 spaces like this, and they were never completed. And they have these drawings that are kind of they're very kind of loose pen and ink drawings, as you can see. And these show episodes from the Passion of Christ in more or less correct order, but they're a little bit odd. And they don't really work with the style of the main miniatures. So, sometimes if a book of hours was left incomplete, somebody came in later and tried to finish it. And I think that's what happened here. But the question is, when was this done? And interestingly, I don't think these are by the original artist at all. I think they're done much later. But fascinatingly, if we look, you remember I showed you at the beginning, and I talked about the provenance, that this belonged in the library. This was in the library of the Duke of Marlborough, and is in the printed sale catalog from 1819. We can find this listed there, and it's described very briefly. And it says that it's a missal, which was a sort of generic term that they used also for books of hours, with incomplete drawings as well as the completed miniature. So already in 1819, this book had these drawings. And that's pretty early for sort of like neo-medieval fill-in drawings. But it's not inconceivable. So what's interesting is that somebody was looking at some other medieval images, I think, in the early 19th century, and very early in the history of sort of Gothic revival and medievalism, and added these miniatures, and they are a bit strange. And here we have like Christ carrying the cross, but it's kind of strange. His sort of crown of thorns looks more like a sort of headdress. And I think the gold border, because you can see that parts of the drawing overlap on the gold border, I think the gold border is also from that later date. So we have this kind of interesting puzzle. It would be interesting to think about where this manuscript was, maybe in the collection of the Duke of Marlborough. That collection is quite well known, well documented. Maybe we could find some intact manuscripts that these drawings copy, but that's would be a bit of a significant research project. Could be interesting for a student. There are some questions, and we only have 3 minutes left. I know this book raises a lot of questions. You can, of course, always email me or Dot for further information, or if you didn't catch anything. The website for comparing the variants is, I think it's manuscripts.org. It's a website that was made first by Eric Driscoll and then has been archived by Peter Kidd. So if you look up Book of Hours test, I think you will find it. But if not, just please email one of us, and we will try our best. And in our last couple of minutes, I did want to show you, yes, that this campaign, we call it a campaign, this attempt to finish these add these drawings, was not followed through, because we have, for the final hours of the Hours of the Cross, we have a blank where the miniature was never even attempted. And then we have, following that, the final, and again, two of the 8 hours for the Hours of the Cross don't have any drawings. And then our final section that's illustrated with a miniature. And you can see the similarity to the Annunciation at the beginning, right? Even with this window. This is the Pentecost. So this is when the apostles are assembled with the Virgin Mary, and these tongues of fire come and allow them to speak different languages. And so the four kind of most important sections of the book have this original miniature. And again, here you can see that there were supposed to be subsequent miniatures that were never completed. And so that's this is the Hours of the Holy Spirit. So it's just another accessory hour, set of hours. And then at the very end of the book, we have what are called suffrages, so prayers to individual saints, which again, it can be customized. They don't have drawings or illustrations here, but they include Saint Barbara, Christopher, and Nicholas, and others. So we're just about at 12:30. I'll hang on for a minute or two. If there are some questions I can answer quickly. If not, please feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to do my best to respond. So thank you, and thank you, Amy, for posting it. I saw that you just posted that link. Enjoy your week, and we will see you next week when Dot will be back. Is that right?
I'll be back.
Excellent. Thank you all.